Hi, and this is another one of my lectures in relation, this time to labor relations, particularly the topic is certification election. Okay, so what is a certification election? Certification election is the process of determining the sole and exclusive bargaining agent of the employees in an appropriate bargaining unit for the purpose of collective bargaining. That is what the labor code, and its implementing rules say in relation to what a certification election is. Okay. Now, what is the nature of a certification election? Is it a litigation? When you file a petition for certification election, are you litigating something? No, it's not. It is not a litigation. It is non-adversarial in character. It is merely a fact-finding proceeding. So it is a fact-finding investigation conducted by the Bureau of Labor Relations, which is under the Department of Labor and Employment, in order to ascertain the wishes of the employees in an establishment. Ano ba yung gusto nilang malaman? Gusto ba talaga nito na mag-organize? Gusto ba nila na ma-represent sila? And the purpose, at the end of the day is for them to execute a collective bargaining agreement with the employer. Okay? So, what are the twofold objectives? Why do you need or why do you ask for or petition for a certification election? Number one, so that the appropriateness of the bargaining unit will be determined. During the last face-to-face class that I had with you, we discussed already what is an appropriate bargaining unit. But let me reiterate, an appropriate bargaining unit is one which embodies the mutuality of interest of the employees in an establishment. So it represents that particular group of workers with common interest and which eventually would best represent that their concerns when they look up to the management for purposes of collective bargaining. So that is what an appropriate bargaining unit is. And in an establishment, you can have more than one bargaining unit or appropriate bargaining unit. It depends. And as I mentioned, in our jurisdiction, what we usually use is the mutuality of interest. So you have to have substantial mutual interest. And if you do have that, then if the group of workers have that, then they can be considered as the appropriate bargaining unit. And I hope that you still remember my discussion before when you consider or when you try to determine the appropriate bargaining unit or the bargaining unit in a particular establishment, it is not the total population of the employees. Okay, it is actually what is left after you take away all those who are not supposed to, let's say, join a union or form a union. So confidential employees, managerial employees, and supervisory employees, at least with respect to joining the rank and file union. So I hope that that is still fresh in your minds. How do we determine the appropriate bargaining unit? And certification election has that for its objective also. Now, what about the second objective? Of course, to ascertain the majority representation of the bargaining representative. So, you have already determined the appropriate bargaining unit. Does that mean there's only one union? No. I think that I also mentioned that in a particular establishment, there can be more than one labor organization. Okay? Hindi necessarily isa lang. But there can only be one bargaining representative. And that is what the certification election is all about. You need to only have one. The one which represents the majority of the employees in the bargaining unit. Okay? Now, what about the employer? What is the role of the employer in certification election proceedings? Generally, none. Okay? So, it is a mere bystander in these proceedings. Except, of course, if it is directed or requested to provide, let's say, copies of the payroll or some other documents, it does not have any role in the proceedings. Why? Because this is for the workers. Okay? So it is an activity which is the sole concern of the workers. Okay? Now, how do, where do you file? Where do you file first? Huwag muna tayo doon sa how do you file kasi petition naman yon. But let us go first to where do you file if you want to file a petition for certification election. So, you need to file it at the regional office of the Department of Labor and Employment nearest, no, to the principal office of the employer. So, that is where you're going to file it. Okay? And let's say if it is located of course in Metro Manila, then you need to file it with the DOL NCR, BLR. And then if it is in Region 1, then you need to file it at the regional office in the Ilocos region, in that particular territory. Okay? Now, what about where, no, when to file the certification election proceedings? So, you cannot just file anytime. Okay? You have to consider two things. First, if there is no duly registered CBA, and second, if there is a duly registered CBA. If there is no duly registered CBA, meaning it is an establishment, no, without any existing CBA with the management, then you can file it at any time. No problem with that. Diba? You can maghahanap ng, well, tama ba that I'm going to file this? Should I wait for some time before I file this petition for certification election? No, you can file it at any time because there's no duly registered CBA. Now, what if there is a duly registered CBA? Then, you have to consider three things. What are these three things? First is the contract bar rule. Second is the 1-year bar rule or certification year rule. And then third, we have the deadlock bar rule. So, ang dami ba? Puro rules tayo ngayon. So, what is this contract bar rule and when does this apply? So, first, it says that a certification election can only be entertained during the so-called freedom period. Okay, what is this freedom period or when is this freedom period? That is within 60 days prior to the expiry date of the 5th year of the collective bargaining agreement. So, if there is a CBA, its lifetime is 5 years. Okay? And the first 3 years is called the economic, the first 3 years concerns the economic provisions. Okay? And then, yung entire 5 years, no, yung 2 years yung representation issues naman. Okay? So, parang ganun yung hatian natin sa isang 5-year lifetime of the collective bargaining agreement. Okay? So, when can you file? Okay? Sabi, within 60 days prior to the expiry date of the CBA. So, 60 days bago patapos yung CBA. So, let's say the CBA is supposed to expire on December 31, then you count 2 months before December 31st, okay, of that particular year. Then that is your freedom period. Within that period, you may file, okay, a petition for certification election. Okay? Now, what about the so-called 1-year bar rule or certification year rule? Okay? It says that no certification election may be held within 1 year from the date of issuance of a final certification election result. Okay? Kasi, kunwari, this year, nagkaroon ng petition for certification election and, you know, the sole and exclusive bargaining agent was already chosen, no, by the workers in that particular establishment. So, nilabas ng BLR yung final certification election result. You need to what? You need to wait more than 1 year, okay, before you can file a new petition for certification election. You cannot question the representation within 1 year from the issuance of the final certification result. Kasi, well, practically, you need to put some stability. Hindi pwede puro na lang ang ginagawa na mag-petition for certification election o mag-certification election proceedings do sa establishment. Kailangan naman may pahinga, di ba? Kailangan naman hayaan mo, di ba? Respect the decision. For 1 year, you cannot have any certification election in the establishment. Okay? Now, what if, okay, the election result was appealed, okay? So, it is valid until such time that the result becomes final and executory. Okay? So, ganun pa rin ang mangyayari sa atin. Okay? Now, what if, okay, this time, merong ongoing negotiations. Okay? Deadlock bar rule will apply. Meaning that a petition for certification election can only be entertained if there is no pending bargaining deadlock, okay, submitted for conciliation or arbitration or had become the subject of a valid notice of strike or lockout. Okay. Remember, at the start of the lecture, I said that we have the certification election in order to ascertain the majority representation, and then at the end of the day, it is in order for them to collectively bargain with the employer. Okay? So, yun yung purpose niya. Diba? Bakit tayo nag-unionize? Bakit in unionizing and in choosing the sole and exclusive bargaining representative, ano ba gagawin nito? Ang gagawin nila is precisely to collectively bargain later with the employer. So sabihin natin that the union, the sole and exclusive bargaining agent, the SEBA, was able to go up to the management, demand from the management, request the management rather to collectively bargain. And now there's an existing negotiation, diba? There's an ongoing collective negotiations with the management. So it cannot, the rival union, for instance, cannot now file a petition for certification election. Okay? Hindi ka pwede makialam. Diba? May ongoing hindi ka pwede mag-file kasi nako-questionin mo. Hindi ka lang natuwa. No? Yung kabilang union, hindi lang natuwa. Tagal naman nung kanilang bargaining. Diba? Nagpa-deadlock pala. Diba? So, kaya nagtatagal kasi meron ng deadlock which is already submitted maybe for arbitration, etc. Ayun. So, during this period, you cannot have a certification election. Diba? Bakit? May pending issue in relation to the CBA, which is being negotiated. Now, what if the CBA is an arbitral award? Hindi yung usual, diba, na ordinary course of things that the CBA was executed by the management and the workers through the SEBA. So, yes, okay, it's still a bar to a petition for certification election. Okay? Even if it is unregistered, let's say, after the CBA was executed, nalimutan ni union na iparehistro yung CBA, yes, it will still bar the certification election. Okay? So, again, let us summarize these three rules. Okay? So, there is no filing for a petition for certification election in the following instances. Number 1, during the existence of a duly registered collective bargaining agreement, except within the freedom period, which is 60 days, prior to the expiry of the CBA. Number 2, within 1 year from the date of issuance of final certification election result. And then third, during the existence of a bargaining deadlock to which an incumbent or certified bargaining agent is a party and which had been submitted to conciliation or arbitration or had been the subject of a valid strike or lockout. Okay. Now, okay lahat. Walang na-violate sa ating mga rules. What will now happen? So, petition, no, for certification election, no, must contain at least 25% of all employees in the appropriate bargaining unit. Okay? So 25% consent signature ang tawag natin diyan. So para makita na yes, meron ng representation issues. Hindi na pwede nang questionin yung majority representation. At the end of the day, class, that is what a certification election is all about. So, pwedeng meron ng may dissent na doon sa SEBA, doon sa sole and exclusive bargaining agent, doon sa union na to. Hindi na sila masaya, di ba? Mga ibang empleyado is no longer happy being represented by the existing SEBA. So, that's why they would like to challenge the majority representation. So, in a nutshell, that is what certification election is all about. Now, so this 25% consent requirement, no, applies to organized establishments, meaning meron ng existing union. Okay? And it may not be strictly complied with. Okay? Hindi naman kailangan na talagang sagad 25%. Okay? It is still discretionary on the part of the mediator or arbiter of the Bureau of Labor Relations to determine, okay, if the certification election should proceed or should the petition be given due course. That is the idea. Okay? Kasi minsan, kulang ng ilan, 2, 3, diba, na boto. But if the 25% is met, then the conduct of the certification election becomes, in a way, mandatory. Okay? Now, there is a pre-election conference which is held, and this is for inclusion and exclusion of voters. Okay? And what is the purpose? Kasi nga, di ba, baka masama pati yung hindi empleyado. At the start of the semester and even during labor standards, we have always emphasized the fact that only employees, and that's why it is important to determine the existence of employer-employee relationship, who would have the right to self-organization. Diba? Nandun yun. Pag di ka empleyado, hindi mo ma-exercise yung right. So, during the pre-election conference, that is what happens. Titinan mo inclusion and exclusion. Okay? So, pwede rin naman na, managerial yan, hindi yan dapat. Diba? Kaya, sabi ko kanina, hindi ko mo empleyado, di ba? Yung total population ng employees in an establishment, hindi ibig sabihin lahat na yan part of the appropriate bargaining unit. So, titingnan mo na yung appropriate bargaining unit in relation to one of the objectives of the certification election, which is to determine the appropriateness of the bargaining unit. Baka nagsama dyan sino? Yung supervisor at saka rank and file. They're not supposed to be in the same union. The supervisory employees can form their own union but not mix or mingle with or join the rank and file union. So, ayun, tatanggalin din. Baka may confidential dyan. O baka naman, yan ay hindi empleyado, iyan ay employee ng contractor. Okay? Under a valid contracting arrangement with the employer. So, those things happen during the pre-election conference. Okay? But, okay, before we continue with the proceedings, what about in an unorganized establishment, meaning that there's no union? Okay? So, if it is unorganized, immediately an order for the conduct of the certification election shall be issued if there is a petition filed by a legitimate labor organization. So, again, we go back to what is a legitimate labor organization. It is a labor organization which is registered with the Department of Labor and Employment. Okay. Now, who can vote in a certification election? All the bona fide employees in the bargaining unit, okay, irrespective of the employment status, meaning whether they are permanent, probationary, okay, whether they are regular or not, long-term employee, etc., as long as they are employees. Okay? And whether or not they are members of a legitimate labor organization or parang sa fraternity if they are barbarians. So, all of them can vote in a certification election. Kaya sabihin nyo, ma'am, paano po yung mga Iglesia ni Cristo, they're not supposed to join a union following the ruling in Victoriano versus Elizalde Rope Workers Union. Yes, they can still vote in a certification election. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that you need to become a member of a union in order for you to vote. As long as you are an employee, that is what gives you or entitles you to the right to vote in a certification election. Now, on the day, okay, sabi natin, wala naman naging problema, maayos. On the day of the election itself, no, pumunta na yung mga empleyado and they cast their vote. By the way, it is secret ballot. Okay? Para maganda. Diba? Hindi yan taas lang ng kamay or whatever. It is by secret ballot. And representatives of the Bureau of Labor Relations are there, no, to administer it. Meaning to ensure that everything is done in accordance with the rules. Okay? So, to have a valid election, at least a majority of all eligible voters in the appropriate bargaining unit must have cast their votes. So, at least majority. And this is where we now talk about the so-called double majority rule. So, what is the double majority rule? First is majority, no, of the BU or the bargaining unit must have cast their votes. That is the first majority. Now, what is the second majority? Majority of these votes must be valid, and it must be voted for a particular union. So, double majority bago ka magkaroon ng union. Bago malaman mo na ito yung resulta, ito yung pinili na bagong SEBA, or if not bagong SEBA, yung SEBA for that particular elections. Okay? So, once, no, the union obtains, no, a majority of the valid votes cast by the eligible voters, it shall be certified as the sole and exclusive bargaining agent of all the workers in that particular bargaining unit. So, yun na yung epekto. Kaya double majority. First, kalahati, at least, no, majority, kalahati plus one, must have cast their votes, and half of that must be what? Must be in favor of one. So that a particular union, no, can claim to have the majority vote. Double majority. Okay, so double. Dalawa dapat may majority. Okay. So, paano pag hindi na-meet yun? Then, the election is not valid. Okay? Now, the abstained, are these considered as valid votes? No, they're not. Okay? They are not considered as valid votes. Now, let's say there are at least 3 choices, diba? And there's no choice which received the majority. Magkakaroon ka ngayon na tinatawag natin runoff election. And what are these? Okay? So, there must be 3 or more choices. And there's no choice receiving the majority of the valid votes. Yun yung unang element. Yun yung unang situation para magkaroon ng runoff. And then second, the total number of votes for all contending unions is at least 50% of the number of votes cast. Okay? So at least 50. Nakuha naman yung 50%. But, okay, wala pa rin nakakuha ng majority. Yun ang situation natin dito. Kaya hindi walang madeklara na ito yung winning union. So, there will be now a runoff election between the 2 labor unions receiving the 2 highest number of votes. Now, the question is no union considered as a vote or a choice? Yes, it is. So, pwede na ang pagbobotohan ay si A, si B, at saka si no union. Pasok pa rin siya doon sa first element that there were 3 or more choices. Okay? So, these elements, ano siya? These should all be present bago magkaroon ng runoff. Okay? So, cumulative yung elements. Hindi pwedeng isa lang ang present. Hindi siya or, siya ay and. So, between 3 or more choices and there was no choice receiving a majority of the valid votes cast. That's the first element. The second element is that the total number of votes for all contending unions is at least 50% of the number of votes cast. And third, between the labor unions, so the runoff elections is conducted between the labor unions receiving the 2 highest number of votes. So parang ano yan, parang kasi wala kang napili doon sa unang takbo, unang pasada ng ating certification elections. So that's why there may be a runoff election. Okay? Now, what if during the certification elections there arose issues regarding employer-employee relationship? Yun nga, kasi inclusion, exclusion, nagkaroon ng issue na these are not employees of the company. They are actually employees of the contractor. Mga ganyan. What can be done? Okay, can it be raised and successfully resolved in a certification election proceedings according to one of the cases decided by the court? Yes. Okay, so the mediator, arbiter, or the Secretary of Labor and Employment has the authority to determine the existence of an employer-employee relationship between the parties in a petition for certification election. So part of their power to do that. But if it becomes an issue during the certification election. Okay. Now, other protests that may arise. So, if it is not raised during the proceedings, then it will be deemed waived. So, kailangan erase mo na lahat. Okay? And the protest must be formalized within 5 days with the mediator arbiter. Now, what about the personality of the union? Okay? Let's say we have 2 unions, Union A, Union B, and Union B says A was not a legitimate labor organization. Diba? May issue doon sa kanyang registration, and therefore it should not be allowed to be a party in the certification election proceedings. Can it be done? No, it cannot be done that way. You have to directly attack the legitimacy of the labor union. It cannot be attacked collaterally. Okay? Hindi pwedeng isabay mo during the conduct of the certification election. Okay? During our discussion on legitimate labor organizations, we already talked about this. Okay? We mentioned that. And the certification election is one such proceeding wherein you cannot attack it, the legitimacy of the labor organization in the guise of the petition for certification election. Now, what else? So, just take note, class, of the intention when we talk about certification election proceedings. Sabi nga natin, diba, kanina, what it wants to achieve, the purpose for the conduct is to determine the wishes of the employees, diba? Gusto ba nilang magka-union o ayaw nila? They're just happy to remain in an unorganized establishment. If that is so, then we cannot step in and intervene and say no, you have to be organized. Now, in the case of an organized establishment naman is, are they still happy with their present representation, or they would like to change their SEBA or sole and exclusive bargaining agent? That is the purpose. At the end of the day, as I always say, yun pa rin ang masusunod. Ano ang gusto na mangyari ng ating mga workers. Okay? And the BLR, no, the Bureau of Labor Relations, no, and the DOLE is there to ensure that the wishes are reflected through what? Through the conduct of the certification elections. Okay? And gano'ng katagal yan? Sabi nga natin, 5 taon. 5 taon ng CBA. So, representation issues cannot be raised earlier, no, than that. Kaya nga meron na tawag tayong contract bar rule. So, what is the purpose of that 5-year lifetime of the CBA? To provide stability rin sa saan? Sa ating proseso, di ba? Hindi yung parang gusto mo magpalit ng CBA every 2 to 3 years just because you are not happy. But remember, class, a collective bargaining agreement, no, the law also recognizes that sometimes it has to be revisited, di ba? Because it is no longer responsive. But not the representation matters in the CBA. No? Hindi yung sa union, hindi yung mga issue ng close shop provisions or union security clauses. Hindi yon. Ano lang, yung tinatawag nating economic provisions ng CBA, which may be what? May be revisited, reviewed, and renegotiated after 3 years. No? So, almost half of the lifetime of the CBA, pag biglang, ayan, gaya niyan, di ba? Ngayon sabi natin, may inflation and some agencies, no? Particularly our legislators are saying, we need to give inflation allowance because the inflation is so bad. And that is one reason why you need to revisit, diba? Tumaas masyado ng bilihin. So yung mga nakalagay doon, no? And when we talk about economic provisions, yung mga monetary benefits and also some non-monetary benefits, they are considered as part of the economic provisions. Baka naman pwede dagdagan. Baka hindi na dapat 30 pesos lang yung additional allowance, meal allowance for a day. Baka naman pwede 50 pesos na. So, these things may be revisited, no, and reviewed and renegotiated after 3 years. But representation, no, after na, no, bago na yun na, kaya nga may tayong freedom period. Okay? So, I hope that through this short lecture, you're able to have an idea of what a certification election is all about. Remember, even if sometimes it becomes, a bone of contention between the warring unions in an establishment. Kasi nga, hindi naman isa lang yan. Posibleng maging dalawa or even more than 2, 3, 4 unions. No? Depende sa isa gano'ng kalaki yung ating establishment. It is still a non-adversarial fact-finding investigation. Yun lang naman ang gusto na mangyari ng ating gobyerno. Ito ba ang wishes, di ba? Because the bottom line is that is what should prevail. Diba? The wishes of our workers when they exercise their right to self-organization, and which includes the right to form, to join, or not to join the union of a union or any association. So with that, I hope that this will help you prepare for the midterm exams, and for those who are not in my class, I hope that this also provided you with some insights. No, very short. This is still not as specific, no, or as detailed as I would want it to be, but it will give you an idea of what a certification election is all about. So, have a good day.